Hey guys, in today's video I'm going to share with you an impressive and transformative story. It is the account of a near-death experience that completely changed a man's view of God and life. He discovered a shocking truth that religions have hidden for centuries, and you won't believe what he revealed. So if you are looking for answers and curiosities about the spiritual world, leave a like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any content like this. Now let's dive into this incredible spiritual journey. Hello, my name is Elian Arichavaleta. I'm not a famous writer or motivational speaker. I'm just an ordinary mechanic from Hialeah, Florida. But something extraordinary happened to me. Something that completely changed my life and the way I see the world. I'm here to share my near-death experience with you. Before going into the details of what happened, I think it's important for you to understand a little about who I was before this event. I was born into a traditional Catholic family. My mother, Maria, was extremely devout, while my father, Javier, was a practical and stoic man. I grew up in an environment where showing emotions was seen as weakness, and success could only be achieved through hard work and discipline. Over time, this environment shaped me into a closed and solitary person. I moved away from people. I preferred to be alone. My job as a mechanic was my refuge, but at the same time, it was a constant source of frustration. Day after day, I repeated the same tasks without feeling like I was doing anything meaningful with my life. In 1999, I was going through a really difficult time. My relationship with my family was practically non-existent. I felt completely alone in the world, as if I was carrying a huge weight on my shoulders and had no one to help me. The nights were particularly difficult. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if there was any purpose in continuing to live. It was on one of those nights that everything changed. I was at rock bottom, feeling like I had nowhere left to go. The idea of ending it all started to seem tempting. I had never been a religious person despite my Catholic upbringing, but that night, I don't know why, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. Pray. It wasn't an elaborate prayer or anything. It was more like a last desperate plea. I said something like, "God, if you really exist, please give me a sign. Show me that there is something more to this life than this pain I'm feeling. If not, I will understand that there is nothing left for me here." I expected silence. To be honest, a part of me wanted silence. It would be confirmation that I was right, that life really had no meaning. But what happened next? Well, it's hard to explain. It's even hard to believe sometimes. But it was real. It was the most intense and transformative experience of my life. What I'm about to tell you may seem crazy. I understand if you have questions. I doubted it myself for a long time. But I ask that you listen with an open mind, because what happened that night completely changed my perspective on life, death, and what lies beyond what we can see. That night, after my desperate prayer, something unbelievable happened. Suddenly, an intense light filled my room. It wasn't like sunlight coming through the window or a lamp being turned on. It was different. It was as if the light itself was alive. At first, I was scared. I thought maybe I was having some kind of hallucination. I closed my eyes tightly, hoping the light would disappear when I opened them again. But when I opened them, the light was still there. In fact, it felt even more intense. The strangest thing is that, despite the brightness, the light didn't hurt my eyes. It was as if she was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I can't really explain it, but it was like the light was inside me too. Then I felt a presence. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything with my ears. But I knew for sure that I wasn't alone. It was a feeling of being completely enveloped by something, someone, and that's when I heard it. Not with my ears, but inside my mind, as if someone was speaking directly to my soul. The voice. Well, calling it a voice isn't quite right. It was more like direct communication without words. But if I had to put it into words, it would be something like this. "I've always been here, Elian. I love you unconditionally." In that moment, all the loneliness I felt, all the emptiness, all the pain, just disappeared. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I felt truly loved and accepted. But the most surprising thing was yet to come. The presence. God, I think, called me by a name. It wasn't Elian. It was a name I had never heard before, but somehow I knew was mine. It was as if it were my real name, something beyond this life. And then, in the blink of an eye, I was no longer in my room. It's difficult to describe where I was, because it wasn't a place in the sense we are used to. It was more like a different dimension. Everything around me seemed to be made of pure love. I can't explain it better than that. In this place, I felt at home. It was as if I had always belonged there but had forgotten. All the worries of my earthly life seemed so small and insignificant compared to what I was experiencing. It was at that moment that I began to understand that what was happening to me was much more than I could have imagined. It wasn't just a dream or a hallucination. It was real, more real than anything I had ever experienced in my life. And that's when God began to reveal things to me that completely changed my view of the world and spirituality. Things I had never considered before, that challenged everything I thought I knew about religion and the afterlife, but that's another part of the story, a part that still leaves me speechless when I try to explain it. But I'll try, because I think it's important to share, because what I learned that night wasn't just for me. It was a message for all of us. While I was in this place of pure love, I began to receive a series of revelations that shook everything I thought I knew about spirituality and religion. It's difficult to put into words, because much of what I was shown was beyond human language. But I will try to explain the best I can. The first thing I understood was that religions, as we know them, are just human interpretations of something much larger and more complex. God showed me that, over the centuries, religions have been distorted by human interests. Fear and the desire for control have led people to manipulate the original messages, turning people away from true spirituality. I was shocked to realize that many of the religious texts we consider sacred have been changed over time, not out of malice necessarily, but out of misunderstanding or the desire for power. The truth, as I was shown, is much simpler and at the same time deeper than any religious doctrine. God told me, Elian, true awakening is not in imposed religious practices, but in discovering the divine essence that exists within you and within every human being. That is where the true connection with me lies. This revelation was like a ray of light piercing through all the layers of beliefs and dogmas that I had accumulated throughout my life. I realized that true spirituality does not need intermediaries. You don't need complicated rituals or strict rules. It is a direct connection between each of us and the divine. Another thing I was shown is that we are all, in essence, spiritual beings having a temporary human experience. Our true nature is much greater and older than our physical bodies or our current personalities. The name God called me by, the one that sounded so familiar, was a reminder of this truth. I also understood that the universe is much more vast and complex than we can imagine. There are multiple dimensions, multiple realities, and our life on Earth is just a small part of our spiritual journey. Death, as I discovered, is not the end, but a transition to another state of existence. One of the most impactful revelations was about the purpose of suffering. I've always wondered why God, if he existed and was loving, would allow so much suffering in the world. The answer I received was surprising. Suffering, although painful, is a tool for spiritual growth. Every challenge we face, every pain we feel, has the potential to make us stronger and wiser. God showed me moments in my life, the humiliations at school, the abuse from my father, the frustrations at work, and made me see that in each of these difficult moments there was an opportunity for growth. Not that God caused suffering, but he allowed us to go through these experiences for our own development. I was with you every moment, Elian, he told me, but I allowed you to face the difficulties alone so that you could grow. It was difficult to accept this at first, but I slowly began to understand the wisdom behind it. Finally, The most profound revelation was about love. Love, as I was shown, is not just a human feeling. It is the most powerful force in the universe, the essence of everything that exists. And this love is not conditional or limited as we often think. It is a love that embraces everything and everyone, without judgment or restriction. These revelations were so intense, so transformative that I felt like every fiber of my being was being reconfigured. It was as if I were waking up from a long dream, seeing reality for the first time. And there was still more to learn. After all these intense revelations, I thought I had already learned everything I could. But he was wrong. The next lesson I received was perhaps the hardest to accept, but also the most transformative. The lesson about forgiveness and universal love. God began to show me images of the people who had hurt me throughout my life. I saw my father, with his harsh words and his emotional coldness. I saw schoolmates who humiliated me. I saw bosses who looked down on me at work. All those people I blamed for my suffering. I confess that at first I felt angry. It's like the sun, which shines equally for everyone, without discrimination. I began to understand that loving universally didn't mean liking everyone or approving of every action. It meant recognizing the intrinsic value of each being, the divine spark that exists in each of us, regardless of our actions or choices. It was a difficult lesson to accept. I had to face my own prejudices, my judgments, my tendency to divide the world into good and bad. I realized that this division was illusory. We are all a complex mix of light and shadow. We are all on a journey of learning and growth. God showed me that forgiveness and universal love were not just for others, but mainly for myself. By forgiving others, I was freeing myself. By loving unconditionally, I was reconnecting with my true essence. This lesson touched me deeply. I realized how many opportunities for growth and connection I had missed because of resentment and fear. How many times had I isolated myself, closed myself off from love, for fear of getting hurt again? I understood that forgiveness and universal love were keys to a fuller and more meaningful life. It wasn't an easy path. I knew it would take time and effort to truly incorporate this lesson into my daily life. But for the first time, I felt it was possible. I came away from this part of the experience, feeling both exhausted and invigorated. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders, replaced by a feeling of lightness and possibility. I knew my life would never be the same after that. Just when I thought my experience was coming to an end, something even more surprising happened. God offered me a glimpse of my future. It was like watching a movie of my own life, but a movie that hadn't been recorded yet. Trust yourself and have courage, God told me. You are stronger than you know. With those words, a series of images began to unfold before me. I found myself coming out of that experience and returning to my normal life, but with a new perspective. I found myself facing challenges, but with an inner strength that I didn't know I possessed. One of the scenes that impacted me the most was the vision of my first wedding. I saw myself in love, full of hope, walking to the altar. But then, I saw this marriage falling apart. It was painful to watch, even though I knew it was just a future possibility. I saw the fights, the hurt, the distancing. I found myself alone again, wondering if I had made the right choice. But then, the scene changed. I saw myself meeting someone else, someone who seemed to understand me in a way no one had ever understood before. I saw a new relationship developing, this time based on mutual understanding, respect, and deep love. I found myself happy, truly happy, in a way I had never experienced before. It wasn't just personal relationships that I saw my career too. I found myself still working as a mechanic, but with a new attitude. I found myself finding satisfaction in my work, not because the work itself had changed, but because I had changed. I found myself helping people, not just fixing their cars, but offering a kind word, a listening ear. I found myself exploring new interests, learning new things. I found myself reading books about spirituality, meditating, looking for ways to connect with that experience I had. I found myself sharing my story with others, not to seek fame or recognition, but to offer hope and comfort. But not everything I saw was easy or pleasant. I found myself facing loss, illness, moments of doubt and fear. I found myself fighting old habits, the temptation to fall back into my old thought patterns. I found myself making mistakes, hurting people unintentionally, having to ask for forgiveness and start over. What struck me about these difficult visions was not the absence of problems, but the way I faced them. I found myself drawing on the inner strength I discovered during my near-death experience. I found myself remembering the lessons about love and forgiveness, applying them to real, challenging situations. One of the most surprising things I saw was my relationship with my family. I found myself reconciling with my parents, especially my mother. I saw deep conversations, shared tears, hugs that seemed to heal years of distance. It was not an instantaneous or magical change, but a gradual process of healing and reconnection. Throughout all of these visions, there was one constant: I was never truly alone. Even in the most difficult moments, I could feel God's presence, that unconditional love that I experienced during my near-death experience. When the visions ended, I felt overwhelmed. It was a lot of information to process, a lot of possibilities to consider. Part of me wanted more details, wanted to know exactly what would happen and when. But I understood that that wasn't the point. The future I was shown was not a fixed destination, but a set of possibilities. I understood that I would still have to make choices. I would still have to work hard. I would still have to face challenges. But now I had a different perspective. I had hope. God reminded me, the future is not written in stone, Elian. These are possibilities, paths you can choose to follow. The choice will always be yours. This vision of the future was both exciting and frightening, but more than anything, it was motivating. I knew I would return to my life with a new purpose, a new understanding, and that in itself made all the difference. After all these intense revelations and the glimpse into the future, I felt like I was being gently pulled back. The light began to dim, and the feeling of being surrounded by pure love began to dissipate. For a moment, I felt panic. I didn't want to leave that place of peace and understanding, but then I heard that comforting voice once again. Elian, it's time to go back. Remember, I will always be with you. And then, in the blink of an eye, I was back in my room. The bright light was gone, replaced by the familiar dimness of my small apartment in Hialeah. For a moment, I was completely disoriented. It was like waking up from an intensely vivid dream, except I knew, deep down in my being, it hadn't been a dream. I looked at the clock next to my bed. Only a few minutes had passed since I had said that desperate prayer. How was it possible? It felt like I had spent an eternity in that experience. I sat up in bed, feeling strangely light and heavy at the same time. My body looked the same, but I felt completely different inside. It was as if every cell of my being had been reconfigured. Tears started rolling down my face. They weren't tears of sadness or joy, but a complex mix of emotions that I could barely understand. Relief, gratitude, amazement, a little fear. All of this mixed together inside me. My mind was spinning, trying to process everything that had happened. The revelations about the nature of reality, the lessons about forgiveness and universal love, the glimpse into my future. It was a lot to take in at once. For a moment, I wondered if I had gone crazy. After all, experiences like this don't happen every day. Could it have been just a hallucination caused by stress and depression? But then I remembered the feeling of unconditional love, the deep peace I had experienced. No, it couldn't have just been my imagination. It was too real, too deep. I got up and went to the window. Outside, the world continued as usual. Cars passed on the street. People walked on the sidewalks. Everything seemed normal. But for me, nothing would ever be normal again. I stood there for a long time, looking out but really looking in. I started thinking about how my life would change from that moment on. How could I incorporate everything I had learned into my daily life? How would I explain this experience to the people around me? I thought about my family, my work colleagues. Would they notice the change in me? How could I share what I had learned without sounding crazy? And more importantly, how could I live up to the lessons I had received? I knew it wouldn't be easy. The world outside hadn't changed, only I had. I knew I would face skepticism, perhaps even ridicule. I knew there would be times when I would doubt myself, when the memory of this experience would seem distant and unreal. But despite all these challenges I knew I would face, I felt a determination growing within me. For the first time in a long time, perhaps the first time in my life, I had a clear purpose. I didn't know exactly how, but I knew I wanted to live in a way that honored this experience, that reflected the love and understanding I had received. I went back to bed and lay down, but I couldn't sleep. I stood there staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the experience in my mind, afraid of forgetting something. I grabbed a notebook and started writing frantically, trying to capture everything while it was still fresh in my memory. When the sun started to rise, I was still writing. I looked out the window and saw the sky turning pink and orange. It was a dawn like any other, but for me it felt like the first dawn of a new life. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time I was eager to find out. I knew I had a lot of work ahead of me, a lot to learn and unlearn, but I also knew I wasn't alone on this journey, and that made all the difference. The days following my near-death experience were, to say the least, surreal. It was as if I was living in two worlds at the same time: the physical world around me, which continued as always, and the inner world that had been completely transformed. The morning after the experience, I woke up feeling different. I hadn't slept much, but I felt strangely refreshed. I looked in the mirror and saw the same face as always, but the eyes looking back at me looked different, more alive, more aware. I went to work as usual. The auto repair shop was the same, the cars that needed fixing were the same, my co-workers were the same. But everything seemed different to me. While working on an engine, I found myself reflecting on the complexity and beauty of creation. Every piece, every gear felt like a miracle. My colleagues noticed the change. "Hey, Elian, did you win the lottery or something?" joked one of them. I just smiled. How could I explain that I had gained something much more valuable than money? During breaks, instead of isolating myself like I used to, I started talking to people more. I heard their stories, their problems, their joys. I realized that each person carried an entire world within them, as complex and valuable as mine. At home, things were also different. The small, simple apartment that once felt like a prison now felt like a refuge. I started meditating, trying to reconnect with that sense of peace I had experienced. I didn't always succeed, but the moments I did were precious. One of the hardest things was dealing with my family. I decided not to tell you about my experience right away. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, or, worse, they'd think I'd gone crazy. Instead, I started making small changes. I called my mom, something I hadn't done in months. The conversation was awkward at first, years of distance creating a barrier between us. But I persisted. We talked about simple things: the weather, my work, her health. At the end of the call, I felt like a small bridge had been built. With my father, things were more difficult. Years of hurt and resentment don't disappear overnight. But I began to see his actions from a new perspective. I remembered what I had learned about forgiveness. I wasn't ready for a big reconciliation, but I took small steps. I responded to a message he had sent me weeks ago. It was a start. One of the biggest changes was in how I dealt with daily challenges. When an angry customer yelled at me about a delay in repairing his car, instead of reacting angrily, I took a deep breath and responded calmly. I tried to put myself in his shoes, understand his frustration. In the end, not only did we resolve the issue, but the customer came away calmer and even apologized for yelling. I began to notice beauty in places I had previously ignored. The sunset seen from my apartment window, the smile of a child on the street, the smell of coffee in the morning. It was as if my senses had been heightened, as if I were truly alive for the first time. But not everything was easy. There were moments when everyday reality seemed so far removed from that transcendental experience that I wondered if I had imagined it all. There were nights when I woke up in a panic, fearing that everything was just an elaborate dream. And there was loneliness. Even though I felt more connected to the people around me, I missed being able to fully share what I had experienced. I longed for someone who could understand, who had been through something similar. It was around this time that I started looking for books about near-death experiences. I avidly read accounts from others, finding comfort in the similarities to my own experience. It helped me accept that what had happened to me was real, that I wasn't alone. I also started exploring different spiritual practices. I tried meditation, yoga, prayer. Some practices resonated more than others, but they all helped me in some way to reconnect with that sense of peace and love I had experienced. By the end of those first few weeks, I knew my life had changed forever. I didn't have all the answers, far from it, but I had a new perspective, a new purpose. And that, I realized, was just the beginning of a much bigger journey. As the months passed after my near-death experience, the initial euphoria began to give way to a more complex reality. It's not that I've lost faith in what I've experienced or forgotten the lessons I've learned, but everyday life has a way of challenging us, of making us question even our deepest convictions. One of the first challenges I faced was dealing with people's reactions when I finally started sharing my experience. I decided to start by telling my best friend, Miguel. I chose my words carefully, trying to convey the depth of what I had experienced without sounding crazy. Miguel listened to me patiently, but I could see the disbelief in his eyes. "Elian," he said gently when I finished, "don't you think maybe this was all a dream? Or maybe a reaction to the stress you were going through?" His words hurt me more than I expected. Part of me wanted to scream, to insist that it was real, that I wasn't crazy. But another part understood his reaction. After all, wasn't that what I would have thought before going through this experience? This pattern repeated itself with others I shared with. Some were openly skeptical, others politely incredulous, and a few seemed genuinely interested. But no one seemed to really understand. I began to feel isolated, like I carried a secret that no one else could fully understand. Additionally, I began to face internal doubts. There were days when I woke up wondering if it had really happened. The memory of the experience sometimes seemed so distant, so unreal compared to the solidity of the world around me. In moments of frustration or sadness, I asked myself why. If I had experienced something so profound, I still struggled with everyday problems. One incident in particular shook me. I was at work when a colleague made a racist comment. In the past, I probably would have ignored it or even silently agreed. But now, remembering the lessons I had received about universal love, I decided to speak out. The discussion that followed was heated. My colleague became defensive, others got involved, and in the end, the atmosphere became tense. I left work that day feeling defeated. Where was all that love and understanding I was supposed to have? Why was it so difficult to apply what I had learned in practice? Another difficulty was dealing with the loss. A few months after my experience, my aunt, who I was very close to as a child, passed away. Despite everything I had learned about the nature of death, I still felt deep pain. I wondered why, if I truly believed that death was just a transition, I still suffered so much. There were times when life seemed to conspire to test my new perspective. Financial problems, conflicts at work, family arguments, all these things kept happening. Sometimes I found myself thinking, if I really had such a life-changing experience, why isn't my life perfect now? But amid these doubts and challenges, there were also moments of clarity and reaffirmation. Sometimes it was something as simple as a particularly beautiful sunset that reminded me of the beauty and love I had experienced. Other times, it was a moment of genuine connection with someone, where I felt that same sense of unity that I had experienced. I began to understand that the real lesson was not to live in a constant state of spiritual ecstasy, but to find that divine connection in the midst of the challenges of everyday life. I realized that the doubts and questions were not signs of weakness, or that my experience had not been real. On the contrary, they were part of the process of deeply integrating that experience into my life. One day while meditating, I had a profound realization. The inner voice that I have always associated with God since my experience told me, "Elian, the journey is the destination. Every challenge, every doubt, every moment of joy or sadness is an opportunity for growth, a chance to apply what you have learned." This realization didn't make the challenges magically disappear, but it changed the way I viewed them. I began to see each difficult situation as an opportunity to practice the love, forgiveness, and understanding I had experienced. Doubts became invitations to deepen my faith, not through blind belief, but through lived experience. I realized that true transformation doesn't happen overnight. It is a continuous process, a dance between the divine and the human, between the extraordinary and the everyday. And in this dance, every step, every stumble, every turn is part of the journey. 5 years have passed since my near-death experience, and looking back, I can clearly see how it shaped my life in ways I never could have imagined. The transformation was neither instantaneous nor easy, but it was profound and lasting. One of the most significant changes occurred in my professional life. Although I still worked as a mechanic, my approach to work completely changed. I began to see each car that came into the shop not just as a machine to fix, but as an extension of the person who owned it. I started listening to customer stories, understanding their concerns and needs. This change in attitude did not go unnoticed. Clients began reaching out to me specifically, trusting not just my technical skills, but my empathy and honesty. My boss noticed this and promoted me to workshop manager. Suddenly, I was in a position where I could influence not only the work we did, but also the environment and culture there. I implemented changes that reflected the values I had learned during my experience. I encouraged an atmosphere of mutual respect among employees. I introduced more sustainable and ecological practices into the workshop. I started a training program for young people in the community, giving them the opportunity to learn a trade. My personal life has also undergone a profound transformation. As my vision had predicted, my first marriage really didn't work out. It was a difficult time, but I was able to handle the divorce with an understanding and compassion that surprised even myself. Instead of becoming bitter or resentful, I was able to see the end of the marriage as an opportunity for growth for both of us. And then, when I least expected it, I met Elena. Our connection was immediate and deep. For the first time, I felt like I could fully share who I was, including my near-death experience. To my surprise and delight, Elena not only believed me, but had her own spiritual experiences to share. Our relationship became not just a romantic, but a spiritual partnership. My relationship with my family has also changed dramatically. With patience and persistence, I managed to rebuild my relationship with my mother. Our conversations, once superficial and tense, became deep and meaningful. She even began to open up to some of the spiritual ideas I shared, finding comfort in them. With my father, the process was slower and more challenging. Years of hurt don't disappear overnight. But over time, we were able to have honest conversations about our past. I discovered that behind the tough facade, there was a man struggling with his own demons. We didn't have a close relationship, but we achieved a mutual understanding and respect that previously seemed impossible. My spiritual quest continued and deepened over the years. I read extensively about different religious and philosophical traditions, always looking for points of connection with my own experience. I began practicing meditation daily, finding it a way to reconnect with that sense of peace and love I experienced during my NDE. I also started participating in support groups for people who have had near-death experiences. Sharing my story and hearing the stories of others has been incredibly therapeutic. I realized I wasn't alone, that there were many other people struggling to integrate extraordinary experiences into their everyday lives. Over time, I became a kind of informal counselor for people going through spiritual or existential crises. Not that I had all the answers, far from it, but I found that my experience and the journey that followed gave me a unique perspective that could help others. One of the most profound lessons I learned over the years was about the nature of love. The love I experienced during my NDE was unconditional and universal, but learning to express that love in everyday life was a constant challenge. I learned that love does not always mean agreeing or approving, but rather recognizing the humanity and inherent value in each person, even those with whom I deeply disagree. I also learned a lot about forgiveness, forgiving my father, my former co-workers who treated me badly, even forgiving myself for my own mistakes and failures, was an ongoing process. I discovered that forgiveness is not a one-time event, but a daily practice, a constant choice to let go of resentment and choose love. Looking back at the man I was before that fateful night, I can hardly believe the transformation. Not that I have become perfect or that my life is free of problems, far from it. I still face challenges, I still make mistakes, I still have moments of doubt and fear. But the difference is that now I have a broader perspective. I see challenges as opportunities for growth. I see the beauty and miracle in everyday life. And most of all, I feel a deep connection to something greater than myself. A connection that sustains me in difficult times and fills me with gratitude in good times. My near-death experience wasn't the end of my journey. It was just the beginning. And this journey, with all its ups and downs, has been the greatest blessing of my life. Today, nearly 25 years after my near-death experience, I feel compelled to reflect on all that has happened and what I have learned. Life has an interesting way of surprising us, of taking us down paths we never imagined. And my journey since that night in 1999 has been nothing short of extraordinary. One of the most profound things I've learned is that spirituality is not something separate from everyday life. It is not something that only happens in moments of deep meditation or transcendental experiences. True spirituality is in how we live each moment, in how we treat each person we meet, in how we respond to each challenge we face. My near-death experience gave me a glimpse of something beyond this physical reality, but the real work has been bringing that understanding into the here and now. It has been a process of learning to see the divine in the mundane, the extraordinary in the ordinary. Another crucial lesson has been about the nature of reality. My experience has shown me that there is much more to the universe than we can perceive with our physical senses. But that doesn't mean this physical world is any less important or less real. On the contrary, I came to see our earthly existence as a precious and meaningful part of a much larger reality. I learned that death is not something to be feared, but it is also not something to be sought prematurely. Every moment of life is a precious opportunity to grow, to love, to make a difference. Death is just a transition, a new chapter in our eternal journey. Love, which I experienced so intensely during my NDE, continues to be the common thread in my life. But I've learned that love isn't always easy or comfortable. Sometimes love means setting limits. Sometimes it means letting go. Sometimes it means facing difficult conflicts. But always, it means recognizing the fundamental humanity in every person, even those with whom we deeply disagree. Forgiveness has been an ongoing practice in my life. Forgive not only others, but also myself. I learned that forgiveness is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. It's a choice we make over and over again, a choice to release resentment and make space for love. One of the most surprising things I've discovered over the years is how my experience has resonated with others. Even those who have never had an NDE often find something in my story that touches something deep within them. It made me realize that, although my experience was unique, the truths it revealed are universal. Of course, there is still a lot of mystery. There are questions I don't have answers to. Why did I have this experience? Why do some people have NDEs and others don't? What exactly happens after death? I learned to be comfortable with these uncertainties, to embrace the mystery as part of the beauty of existence. One thing that has changed drastically over the years is my relationship with organized religion. Although I deeply respect people's faiths, I no longer identify with any specific religion. Instead, I see truth and beauty in many different traditions. My religion, if I can call it that, is simply trying to live with love, compassion, and gratitude each day. Looking back at the scared, desperate man I was that night in 1999, I feel deep gratitude. Gratitude for the journey, for the ups and downs, for the lessons learned, for the people I met along the way. Every moment, every challenge, every joy has been part of the intricate and beautiful tapestry that is my life. I don't know what the future holds. The vision I saw during my NDE only extended so far, and now I am navigating uncharted waters. But I'm not afraid. I know that no matter what happens, that love I experienced is always there, always accessible. If there is one message I would like to share with the world based on my experience, it is this: you are deeply loved. You are more than your physical body, more than your achievements or failures. You are a unique expression of the divine, with an inherent purpose and value. And every moment of your life is a precious opportunity to express that love, to grow, to make a difference. My near-death experience wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything. It was the first step on a journey that continues to this day and which, I am sure, will continue far beyond this life. It is a journey of discovery, of love, of continuous growth, and I am deeply grateful for every step of the way. As I share this story, my hope is that it can bring comfort, inspiration, and perhaps a little light to those who are struggling with their own existential questions. Remember, you are not alone. We are all on this journey together. We are all part of something much bigger than we can imagine. And each of us has the power to make a difference, to spread love, to make the world a better place. This is the final lesson I learned, that each of us, in our own unique way, is a conduit for the divine love that permeates the entire universe. And it is in this truth that I find peace, purpose, and lasting joy.